My beloved child, stop right where you are. I know what is burning inside you. I know the anger you have been carrying, sometimes white hot and barely contained, sometimes cold and settled into a bitterness that has become so familiar you have almost stopped noticing it is there. I know what caused it. I know who caused it. I know the specific injustice, the specific wound, the specific series of events that lit this fire in you, and the specific reasons why it has not gone out. And I need you to hear something before we go any further. I am not here to tell you that your anger is wrong. I am here to speak the truth about it, what it is doing to you, and what I want to do with it. Because your anger in my hands is not the problem people have told you it is. It is raw material. And I am very good at working with raw material. You did not find this message by accident. I've been watching what anger and bitterness have been doing to you, and I will not remain silent while they continue their work. Because bitterness is one of the most patient and persistent destroyers I have ever seen operate in a human life. It does not announce itself dramatically. It settles in quietly, roots deeply, and then goes to work, slowly coloring every experience, slowly closing off every relationship, slowly building a wall between you and the life I intended for you that gets thicker and more solid with every day it is not addressed. And I am not willing to watch that happen to you without speaking. I want to say something directly that the church often gets wrong about anger. Anger itself is not sin. I get angry. My anger is described throughout Scripture, not as a flaw in my character, but as the appropriate response of a holy God to genuine injustice and genuine wrong. When Jesus walked into the temple and found it filled with exploitation, he did not compose a measured theological critique. He overturned the tables. He made a whip. He drove people out. That was not a failure of emotional regulation. That was righteous anger in action. And the anger you feel, the anger at what was done to you, the anger at the injustice you have witnessed or experienced, the anger at systems and people and circumstances that have caused real harm, that anger, in its origin, may be one of the most appropriate and honest responses you have ever had. The problem is not the anger. The problem is what has been done with it, and what it has become over time when it was not processed, not released, not surrendered to me. Because anger that is not moved through becomes bitterness. And bitterness is anger that has calcified, that has lost its heat and its energy and its potential for productive action, and has instead become a permanent feature of your inner landscape, a settled resentment that colors everything without changing anything. Bitterness keeps you emotionally present in a moment that is long past. It chains you to the person or the situation that wronged you, giving them continued power over your present long after the original event is over. And it costs you in joy, in connection, in the energy that could be going toward the life I have for you, but is instead being consumed by the ongoing tending of a wound that refuses to close because bitterness keeps it open. So I am asking you to stay here with me and be honest. More honest about the anger than you have probably been willing to be in a long time. Because many of you have been suppressing it, telling yourself you have forgiven when the bitterness is still very much present, performing a peaceful externality while the anger continues to do its work underneath. I am not asking for performance. I am asking for honesty, because I can only work with what you actually bring me, not with what you present to the world. Bring me the real fire, all of it, and let me show you what I can do with it. My child, I want to go beneath the surface of the anger and speak to what is underneath it, because anger is almost never the primary emotion. It is almost always a secondary response to something deeper, a wound, a fear, a grief, a sense of injustice that has not been adequately addressed. And healing anger requires going to the root, not just managing the symptom. So I want to help you see what is underneath yours. Beneath most anger there is hurt. The anger is the armor that the hurt puts on when it does not feel safe to simply be vulnerable and wounded. When someone wrongs you, the immediate experience may be pain, but pain feels dangerous, feels exposed, feels like weakness. Anger feels stronger. Anger feels like it has edges, like it creates distance, like it protects the wound from further damage. And so the hurt quickly becomes anger, because anger is the form the pain takes when the pain needs to defend itself. If you can identify the hurt beneath your anger, the specific wound that the anger is protecting, you are getting close to the actual source of the suffering. And that is where the healing can begin. Beneath anger there is often fear. The anger at a person who betrayed you contains the fear that it will happen again, that you are not safe, that you cannot trust your own judgment. The anger at circumstances that felt out of your control contains the fear of powerlessness, the terror of a life that does not respond to your best efforts to manage it. The anger at me contains the fear that I am not who you believed me to be, that the universe is not ordered by a God who is good, that you are more alone in this than you wanted to believe. These fears are real and they deserve to be addressed as fears, not just managed as anger. Because when the fear is spoken and brought to me, I can speak to it directly. And the anger which was protecting the fear begins to have less work to do. Beneath anger there is almost always grief. The anger at what was done to you contains grief for the safety that was violated, for the innocence that was lost, for the relationship that ended or was permanently changed, for the version of your life that would have been if the wrong thing had not happened. Grief and anger are closely related. They are both responses to loss, and they often travel together, sometimes taking turns in the foreground. When you find yourself cycling between grief and anger, that is normal. That is the natural movement of a heart processing a real wound. I am with you in both, and I ask only that you let me into both, rather than keeping me in the composed version of your emotional life, while carrying the anger and the grief alone. I also want to speak to a particular and often unacknowledged source of anger at me. Many people who are deeply religious carry a significant and deeply suppressed anger at God, anger at what I allowed, anger at prayers that seem to go unanswered, anger at the timing of losses and the silence in seasons of desperate need. This anger is real. It is not blasphemy. It is not evidence of failed faith. It is the honest response of a person who genuinely believed in me and felt let down by the gap between what they believed I would do and what actually happened. And I want you to know, I can receive that anger. I am not fragile. I am not going to withdraw from you because you are honest about being angry at me. The Psalms are full of people being angry at God. Job was angry at God, and I did not destroy them for it. I engaged with them. I want to engage with you. Finally, I want to speak to the anger that comes from injustice, not personal injustice done to you, but the larger injustices of the world that you have witnessed or experienced. The anger at systems that oppress, at structures that harm the vulnerable, at the persistent gap between how the world is and how it should be. This anger is one of the most important forms of anger there is, because it is the fuel for the work of justice, the work of making the world more like what I intend it to be. This anger is not something to be released or suppressed. It is something to be directed, channeled, turned into action. And I will speak more about that in a moment. I want to speak now to the specific lies that anger and bitterness plant in the human heart, because they are sophisticated and they are self-reinforcing, and they will continue their destructive work until they are directly confronted with truth. The first lie is that your anger is protecting you, that the bitterness is a wall keeping you safe from further harm, that releasing it would leave you exposed and vulnerable, that without the anger you would have nothing between you and being hurt again. This lie feels true because anger does create a kind of emotional distance, a force field that keeps people at arm's length. But the protection it offers is an illusion. The wall that keeps the threat out also keeps the good in, the love, the connection, the life that is available to you when you are not barricaded behind resentment. Bitterness does not protect you. It imprisons you. And the door of the prison is locked from the inside. The second lie is that holding on to the anger is somehow holding the person who wronged you accountable. That releasing it is letting them off the hook. That forgiveness means they get away with what they did. That your continued bitterness is a form of justice. But my child, your bitterness has no effect on them. They may not even know you are bitter. They may be living their life entirely undisturbed by the resentment you are carrying, while the resentment continues to consume you from the inside. Holding on to anger does not punish the person who wronged you. It punishes you. And releasing it, releasing the debt to me, the one who is actually qualified to deal with it, is not injustice. It is the beginning of your own freedom. The third lie is that you have every right to be angry, and therefore the anger is justified indefinitely. Yes, you had every right to be angry. What happened to you was wrong, and the anger in response was legitimate. But the right to an emotion in response to a wrong is not the same as the right to allow that emotion to govern your life forever. There is a difference between feeling anger and being defined by it. There is a difference between the righteous anger of the moment and the settled bitterness of years. The anger was justified. The indefinite imprisonment in it is not because you do not deserve better, but because you deserve more than a life organized around a wound. The fourth lie is that forgiveness requires feeling forgiving. That you cannot genuinely forgive someone until you feel at peace with what they did, until the anger has naturally subsided, and what remains is a kind of warm indifference. But forgiveness is not primarily a feeling. It is a decision, a choice made by the will, often in the complete absence of forgiving feelings, to release the debt and hand it over to me. The feelings often follow the decision rather than preceding it. The person who waits to feel forgiving before they forgive usually waits forever, because the feeling does not come as a precondition. It comes as a consequence of the choice having been made. Make the choice, even without the feeling, and watch what happens over time. The fifth lie is that your anger makes you powerful, and releasing it would make you weak. That the fire gives you an edge, a sharpness, an energy that you would lose if you let it go. There is a kernel of truth here. Anger does produce a kind of energy. But it is a corrosive energy, one that burns through your own joy and peace and relationships as fuel. The power I want to give you is not the brittle, self-consuming power of bitterness. It is the genuine, sustainable, unstoppable power of a life freed from resentment and fully available to the purposes I have placed in you. That power is greater than anything anger ever produced, and it does not cost you the things anger costs you. My beloved, I want to speak now about what I actually want to do with your anger, because I am not asking you to simply put it down and walk away empty-handed. I am asking you to bring it to me so that I can transform it. Because anger, when it is surrendered to me, does not disappear. It becomes something else. Something more powerful, more purposeful, more directed toward what actually matters. Let me show you what I mean. The first thing I do with surrendered anger is turn it into fuel for healing. The energy that was going into maintaining the bitterness, rehearsing the grievances, feeding the resentment, that energy does not simply evaporate when the bitterness releases. It becomes available for other purposes. People who have gone through the process of releasing deep anger often report a sudden access to energy and creativity and capacity for joy that they did not realize the bitterness was suppressing. The releasing of what was consuming you frees up what was being consumed, and what was being consumed was your capacity for life. When I get the anger, you get your life back. The second thing I do with surrendered anger is turn it into compassion. The person who has processed their own wounds, who has gone through the fire of anger and bitterness, and come out the other side through genuine healing, often becomes one of the most compassionate people in any room they enter. Because they know what it is to be wounded. They know what it is to struggle with the desire for justice and the call to forgive. They know the weight of carrying bitterness and the freedom of releasing it. And that experiential knowledge translates into an ability to sit with other people in their anger and bitterness without judgment, with genuine understanding, with a specific kind of compassion that only comes from having been there. The third thing I do with surrendered anger is turn it into wisdom. Anger that has been processed rather than suppressed or acted out becomes a teacher. It reveals your values, what matters enough to you that its violation produces fire. It reveals your wounds, where the previous hurts are that made this particular thing so painful. It reveals your patterns, the recurring situations that reliably produce this response, and the root causes that need addressing. Anger that is brought to me and examined in my presence becomes a map of your inner world that, once understood, allows you to navigate it with far more wisdom and self-awareness than you had before. And the fourth thing, perhaps the most significant, is that I want to turn your anger at injustice into action for change. The anger you feel at what is wrong in the world, at the suffering of the vulnerable, at the systems that perpetuate harm, at the gaps between how things are and how they should be. This anger is not something to be neutralized. It is something to be directed. The great movers of human history, the ones who confronted slavery, who fought for civil rights, who stood against oppression at personal cost, were not people without anger. They were people whose anger had been refined into a focused, sustained, purposeful force for change. I am asking you, what is your anger telling you about what you care about? What injustice does it point toward? What cause does it want to serve? Because I want to take that anger and give it a direction that actually accomplishes something, rather than simply consuming you. The path from where you are to where I am describing goes through forgiveness, and I want to speak to that honestly. Forgiveness is not a single moment. It is often a long and nonlinear process, especially for deep wounds. It involves grieving what was done, It involves honest acknowledgement of the full cost of the wrong. It involves repeated choices, in the face of recurring anger, to release the debt rather than rehearse it. It involves trusting me with the justice, believing that I see what was done, that I care about what was done, and that I am the appropriate one to deal with it, rather than you carrying that burden. And it eventually involves, not immediately, not all at once, but eventually, the discovery that the person who wronged you is also a broken and beloved human being, operating out of their own wounds and their own limitations, for whom I also died, whom I also love, and whose story is also not finished. My beloved child, I want to speak now about what life looks like on the other side of bitterness, because I want you to have a vision of the freedom I am inviting you into, not as an abstract spiritual ideal, but as a real and lived experience that is available to you. Because the difference between a life organized around bitterness and a life freed from it is not small. It is one of the most dramatic transformations I produce in human beings, and I want you to want it badly enough to do the hard work of getting there. On the other side of bitterness there is lightness, a physical, almost bodily sense of weight being lifted that people who have released deep anger consistently describe. The carrying of resentment is genuinely heavy. It occupies energy, attention, emotional space, physical tension. When it releases, the lightness that replaces it can feel almost disorienting at first, because you have been so accustomed to the weight that its absence feels strange. But strange quickly gives way to relief, and relief gives way to a quality of presence in your own life that bitterness was stealing. You begin to be actually here, in conversations, in relationships, in moments, in a way that the bitterness was preventing. On the other side of bitterness, there is the return of genuine joy. Not the performed happiness that coexisted with hidden resentment, but the real thing. Joy that does not have to be managed or monitored, that does not set off the internal alarm, that asks whether you are allowed to feel this given everything that happened. The bitterness poisons joy in a specific way. It makes good moments feel either temporary or undeserved, always shadowed by the awareness of what was done and the ongoing grievance about it. When the bitterness releases, the joy can land fully. The good moment can just be a good moment without the shadow. And that difference between shadowed joy and genuine joy is more significant than it sounds. On the other side of bitterness, there is the restoration of your relationships. Because bitterness, even when it is directed at a specific person or situation, has a way of leaking into every relationship. The guardedness it produces, the edge it adds to your interactions, the way it makes you hyper-vigilant for the next betrayal, these affect everyone, not just the person who originally caused the anger. When the bitterness releases, the relationships around you often respond. People who were maintaining a careful distance from the anger begin to come closer. Connections that had been strained by the edge you were carrying begin to soften. You become easier to be with, not because you become less honest or less yourself, but because you are no longer radiating a warning signal that keeps people at arm's length. On the other side of bitterness there is, perhaps most significantly, the restoration of your relationship with me. Because bitterness, especially bitterness that involves anger at me, creates a barrier in our relationship that affects everything. Prayer feels hollow. Worship feels performed. The sense of my presence is muted by the wall that the anger has built. And when the anger is brought to me honestly, when the bitterness is laid down and the forgiveness process begins, what returns is often the most real, and the most intimate encounter with me that you have ever experienced. Because the honesty required to process the anger with me is the same honesty that creates genuine intimacy. You cannot be fully close to me while you are performing peace you do not feel. But when you bring the real thing, the real fire, the real hurt, the real anger, and let me work with it, what grows out of that honesty is a relationship more real and more sustaining than anything the performance could produce. I want to speak a word of release over you now. I am releasing you from the prison of the bitterness you have been carrying. Not demanding it in a moment, not requiring a performance of forgiveness that your heart has not yet reached, but speaking the beginning of a process that I am initiating over your life right now. A softening, an opening, a willingness to consider what freedom from this might feel like, and a tentative step toward it. That step is enough for me to work with. That crack of willingness is all I need to begin the transformation. Because I am very good at turning small openings into wide open doors. So I say to you, my beloved child, the fire in you is not your enemy. It is energy, and energy can be redirected. The anger that has been consuming you can become the fuel for something extraordinary, for your own healing, for compassion toward others who are where you have been, for action on behalf of what genuinely matters, for a relationship with me that is finally honest enough to be real. Bring me the fire. All of it. I am not afraid of it. I am not put off by it. I have been waiting for you to bring it to me, because I have known all along what I want to do with it. And what I have in mind is so much better than what the bitterness has been producing, that you will not believe the difference until you experience it. Come, bring the anger, and let me show you what I can build with it.